Ladies and gentlemen, monsters and maniacs, my name is the Pumpkin Queen, and I want to welcome you all to my castle tonight. Or well, the castle gardens actually. I put up a little fireplace so we can all get cozy while we're here. And I want to wish you all a very happy Spooktober month. And a very happy Halloween while we're at it. And because of the October month, I have a very special story in store for you tonight. So, let's get into it, shall we? Black Widow of Hazel Green. It's Halloween weekend, and my friend Kayla and I have plans on visiting the Dill Mansion. It's a local place that has a violent history. We received a flyer in the mail inviting us to take a first annual Halloween tour. As the flyer states, this is the first year that has been opening to the public, and we can't wait to take the tour. So, a little backstory on the Dill Mansion, and what it makes a must-visit for a scary season. It had been owned by a lady named Elizabeth Dill. Elizabeth was considered a striking young lady with a long auburn hair, creamy complexion, and dark brown eyes. She was also married and widowed 6 times. The mansion was built on an Indian burial ground. For this reason, some thought the land was a curse. Others thought Elizabeth was a murderer. There's even a song by Shane Atkins that goes along with the local lore. The eerie lyrics and a country vibe that makes it perfect for an Apacala folktale like the Black Widow of Hazel Green. I thought that place burned down a long time ago, Kayla says. Well, obviously not, since we're about to take a tour of it, I responded. Hurry up and get ready. I want to be the first in line. We are full excitement as we hit the road. The windows are down to let in the cool fall air. We're headbanging as Living Dead Girl of Rob Zombie blasts from the speakers and the entire way there. We pull up to an old mansion. Some windows are boarded up. The paint is faded and chipped. The exterior is ravaged by time. The old house is beautiful, in an antique sort of way. We were the first to show up, and what seemed to be the only people to show up. An African-American lady waits for us on the steps of the porch. We are led to the front door and into the foyer, with the instruction to wait for the tour guide. What about admissions? I asked the nice lady that led us to the foyer. This one is on us, she responded before turning around and walking back to the front door. I'm not arguing over against a free tour, so we wait patiently. After only a few minutes, a lady appears. Her appearance fits the late 1800s, time period Elizabeth lived in. A full-length, light blue dress with dark blue accents, multi-puffed sleeves that hung over her shoulders. Her fiery red hair curled up into a ball. I'm your tour guide for today, and in some instances, I will be playing the part of Miss Elizabeth herself. As you will see, we offer much more than just a tour. You'll get a show. You will step into the past and see what it was like in the late 1800s for Elizabeth and her family. With that instruction, she instructed us to follow her. She led us into the kitchen. You could tell at one time this was a state-of-art cooking area, but with time it had aged horribly. The tall guy gestured to the kitchen with a hand. What used to be high-tech, a cumulate kitchen, where many meals were made that filled the stomachs of the inhabitants of this fine house, and where Elizabeth added the arsenic to those meals that made the men terribly ill, is now dingy and antique. How do you know they were poisoned? There was a rumor that the house was built on an Indian burial ground. Do you think it was a curse? I asked. She just smiled and responded with, "Follow me," and waved us into the next room. We stepped through the threshold to see a large wooden table. Very intricate, detailed carvings in the molding that ran along the edge of the table. A lot of skill and hours went into making this. 4 men sat along the wooden table, their bodies bloated and slumped over, their skin darkened. I assumed they're supposed to represent the 4 husbands that had passed away. "They look so real," Kyla whispered as she jabbed me in the rib and gave a slight pointing gesture at the props sitting at the table. The guide started once again. "This is a dining room where the arsenic was consumed by those ungrateful bastards day after day." She pointed out at a man as she said this. She walked behind one of them and grabbed him by the hair of his head. He had slumped over so far that his face was planted on the surface of the table. She yanked it back, peeling away the skin that had stayed behind on the table's surface. The sound of decaying skin ripped away from the muscle made me queasy, even though I knew it wasn't real. Their skin would darken, the hair would fall out, breathing would become labored. She paused for a moment. Her eyes rolled up and to the left like she was trying to figure out what to say next. It would be like trying to suck air through a straw, and soon their liver and kidneys would fill. She let go of the head, and the body slumped back into its original place. The head hit the table with a wet thud. "That was so gross. This is more awesome than I thought it was going to be." Kyla squealed in excitement. "I'm glad you girls are enjoying yourselves," the guide said with a smile and began to walk down the hallway. We followed her, hanging on her every word intently. Elizabeth suspected her first husband of infinity, so she killed him. After that, she did it for the thrill of the kill, and the money didn't hurt. She would find a wealthy man, and not long after they wed, he would mysteriously become ill and die. What no one suspected was that Elizabeth poisoned them. The fools blamed it on the cursed land. She let out a chuckle at the last statement. The old dingly hallway had cobwebs hanging from the ceiling. Who had a dunk under a few, swatting them away with her hands. Nothing worse than a cobweb getting caught in her hair. Suddenly, I felt a sharp pain in my foot. I glanced down to see a piece of wooden floor had splintered up and wedged itself into my big toenail. Before you ask, October in Alabama has a warm enough days, where open-toed sandals are acceptable. Anyway, my inventory yelp at the sudden pain drew attention of both Kayla and the tour guide. "Is something wrong?" the tour guide asked. I raised my foot, revealing a large splinter jutting out from underneath my big toenail, blood trickling down and dripping on the floor. "Oh my god! Just look at that, makes my toes hurt," Kyla said with a shudder. "Let me take a look at it," the tour guide said, as she took my foot in her hand and inspected it. She then pinched a large splinter between her fingers, and before I could protest, she gave it a yank. "Got it," she said, and she held a blood-covered fragment in the air. I let a few choice words fly at the intense pain. "Settle down, you have to pull it out quickly, or just torture. Now, stop dragging your feet, or that wouldn't happen." I was slightly offended by the sudden rudeness combined with the pain. I looked at Kyla and saw the smirk on her face. "Yeah, Abby, stop dragging your feet." I hit Kayla with a friendly jab on the shoulder, followed by a middle finger, as the punch only caused her to laugh harder at my misfortune. Settle down now, girls. This is the last room I'm going to show you before we head outside, the guide said as she opened the door. And we step into a rather large room, just as dingy and dark as the rest of the house. A sickly-looking man is hanging over the side of a dry bed, heaving. He was propped up in his arms, and they gave out under the weight of his body, and tumbles helplessly on the floor. He rolled to his side and began to shake as he vomited the blood violently. I wasn't expecting this kind of show when I arrived. It definitely is a pleasant surprise. Nothing like blood and gore to celebrate Halloween. The guy turns to us and begins to tell us what we're looking at. This is the master bedroom, where so much passionate love was made, where Elizabeth's 2 children were conceived. She then turns to the man lying on the floor, his head in a pool of blood he just threw up. It's where the ungrateful man died a slow, painful death. She then spits on the man on the floor. He points a shaky finger at her and says, "Get away from me, you evil bitch." He then began dry heaving again, small droplets of blood falling from his lips. She let out a laugh and guided us to the door, shutting it behind her. "Let's let him die in peace," she said with another chuckle. As she guided us outside, I let her know how much we enjoyed ourselves. This is really much more than I expected. I thought we would get a tour of the house, learn a few fun facts, and that would be it. But the blood and gore is amazing though. The interaction between you and the guy in the room. You really seemed to hate each other with a passion. Maybe I should pursue an acting career? The guide said with a wink. Before long, we found ourselves standing in the front of a separate building from the house. It was big compared to my standards, but compared to the mansion we had just left, it was a hut. "This is the slave quarters," the guide said, as she reached for the door and pulled it open. She then froze at the steps across the threshold, and let an audible gasp. We quickly saw what had caused the tour guide's sudden shock. A man and a woman had tangled up in one another of the slave bunks, embraced in each other's arms. A series of thrusts and grunts came from an abrupt stop as the tall guy let out a scream. "How could you do this to me?" The man turned around in surprise. He quickly stood up, pulling up his pants simultaneously. "Elizabeth!" is all he managed to say. Elizabeth began to scream at the man again. "How could you do this to me? How can you take our marriage and throw it down the drain like this? With a slave? Why? I'm so sorry, sweetie. There is some you should know." He pulls the other woman in close. "When love, the age-old when love line," Kayla pokes fun. "I'm sorry it had to be this way," the man continued. The other lady looked at him with a smile and caressed his cheek with the back of her hand. This encouraged Elizabeth, and she stormed out of the building. The man walked up to us and said, "You girls should leave now. Elizabeth gets violent when she's..." He doesn't get to finish his sentence, as a large rock collides with the side of his skull, wielded by Elizabeth. Blood splatters hit my face, and a coppery taste filled my mouth, and I immediately began to gag as some of the blood splatters went into my mouth. The man collapsed on the floor with a giant gash in his head. I grabbed Kayla's arm. "We need to go." "Why? It's getting good," Kayla responded. "It's real. The blood is real. I got some of it in my mouth. It's definitely not fake blood. We need to leave now." "You can't be serious, Kyla said, but now with a slightly worried look on the face. Elizabeth straddled the man and repeatedly hit the man in the head until his head split open, like a jack-o'-lantern that just met the business of a baseball bat on Halloween. Blood and brain matted leak out on the floor and splattered the wall. Elizabeth turned to the slave. "You whore!" She grabbed the slave by the hair and pulled her over the deceased man and threw her on top of him. "Bury him. And do it quickly before you'll join him." Elizabeth turned to us. She looked different than before. She looked older. She had heavy black around her eyes. Her skin went from a clear creamy complexion to a pale blue. Her perfectly smooth face had now chapped and cracked. A piece of her skin dangled from her face, exposing a cheekbone and upper teeth. She looked at us with decaying wide eyes, but you could still see the hate and rage behind them. Kayla and I turned and ran through the door. We were greeted by the sight of the mansion consumed by fire. I turned to see Kayla made it out of the building safely. Over her chute, just inside, is a plantation cemetery. All 6 of the men from the tour emerged from the trees, walking towards us with their tattered clothes and bloated bodies, looking as they had been dead for decades. Elizabeth burst through the door with a crazy look on her deceased face. "Where you going, girls? The real fun has just begun." She let out a wicked laughter. The sudden scare of Elizabeth bursting through the door caused Kayla to jump, and when she saw Elizabeth coming from one direction, and the 6 ex-husbands of the Black Widow coming from the other, she backpedaled and tripped over her own 2 feet. She gave Elizabeth time to pounce on top of her, Kyla screaming at the top of her lungs, just trying to put up a fight. But Elizabeth had her pinned down on the ground with her knees. Elizabeth plunged her decayed black teeth into Kayla's shoulder. Kayla let out a scream of pain, and Elizabeth brings her head up and split a chunk of Kayla's flesh from her lips. I know, I have to do something, or else Kayla will die. I played soccer throughout middle school, and I put that training to use. With a running start, I put everything I could muster behind that kick. Hope Solo would have been proud. My foot connects to the lower jaw, and a follow-through sent her tumbling. Elizabeth didn't move for a moment before raising her head and made eye contact with mine. "You're going to regret that, you little bitch." But Elizabeth didn't get to fulfill that promise as her 6 late husbands descended upon her. They were picking her apart like a group of vultures, like a fresh roadkill. The sound of flesh ripping and bones breaking can be heard of Elizabeth's screams as she was torn apart limb by limb. Elizabeth's head rolled out of the pile and stopped in front of me. I reached over and kicked it, just to make sure she was dead. Elizabeth's severed head snapped her teeth at the foot before letting out another wicked laugh. It would be her last laugh, as I took the heel of my foot and repeatedly smashed her head with it, until nothing but a pile of broken bones, flesh and teeth was left. I looked upon the 6 husbands staring at me. They said nothing, just smiled with a look of satisfaction. I'm not sure if they would have attacked us, but I wasn't going to give them a chance. We ran around the burning mansion to the front yard where the cars parked. I pulled the keys from my pocket and repeatedly hit the unlock door button, so they unlock when we get there. We opened the doors and jumped in. As we looked through the front windshield, the mansion was no longer there, just the burnt remains of a house that stood long ago. I froze, stunned at the sight before me. Kayla's words snapped me back into reality. What the hell are you waiting for? Let's get the hell away from this place! I sped down a dirt road. The tires screeched as I never let up when I turned into the paved road. I sped away, and we never looked back in fear of seeing a ghost Black Widow chasing us down the street for God-forbidding sitting in the back seat. That crossed my mind a few times, but I could never gather the courage to turn around. We relaxed a little as I pulled into the driveway and parked. My hands were still shaking from fear. No one will believe us, Kyla said. She pulled up her shirt sleeve, down to show a nice, chunkier skin mist. Am I going to turn into a zombie now? Pretty sure Elizabeth was a ghost, not a zombie. I don't think that's how it works, I said as we both let out a chuckle. We sat in silence for a minute before I turned to Kayla. Let's just promise each other. We will never go back to that place. You don't have to tell me twice, Kayla responded. Kayla got away with several stitches and a week worth of antibiotics to keep from getting an infection. I didn't sleep much that night, as you can imagine. The next day, another flyer came into the mail. It was a picture of the old house from long ago. There was a big, bold text at the bottom of the page. Thank you for visiting the Dill Mansion. We hope you enjoyed your visit. We enjoyed having you, and hope to see you again soon. Thank you all so much for listening to tonight's story. Now I'd like to take a moment to thank all of my Patreons who helped make this channel possible. Thank you, CoolScout09 and Lady Nevermore, for all your help and support. You guys are amazing.